I said, well, remember how we've always talked about when mommy's going to get better? They said, yes. And I said, well, she's not going to get better. She's going to go to heaven. And they both started crying. I started crying. And as kids will do, they get up and hug me. In unison, they say, can we have our snack now? Because that's what kids...
Because they don't even know what to think about. Welcome to A Place of Yes. I'm your host, Heather Straughter, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And all I can say is I dug deep, figured out where I was and where I wanted to be. And for me, the answer was in a place of yes. Welcome to the show. But first, it's time for our review of the week. So thankful to Heather for sharing her experiences. This podcast will be a wonderful support for my clients that are struggling with the devastating heartbreak of the loss of a child. I'm always appreciative of when people make the connection of how they can support people who are having this horrible loss. And I love that she thinks that my stories and the stories that we tell, which are stories of grief, but also stories of hope, can be helpful. And I like that connection, and I hope that it's true for her clients. I'm sitting here with Mark Mulholland, who is News Channel 13 director. Anchor. Could be the director.
Sure.
And he lost his wife, Kelly, to cancer. And he, similar to us, started a nonprofit, Kelly's Angels. I mean, I hate what we both have been through, right? But I love that we both handled this incredible, horrible experience. And some would say, so I lost a child, you lost a spouse. Like, those are really big losses. And we have turned them into these other things. We've used them to give everybody, not just ourselves, but people around us, this chance to talk about our people. And for me, I always say we selfishly started it because we wanted to keep Jake in the room. We wanted to speak to him. And I don't know if you had that experience, but like after Jake died, it's almost like it was like this awkward silence sometimes. Like people didn't want to talk about it. And that broke my heart and it made me angry, in those time afterwards. So did you experience that? Like,
yes.
And I imagine everyone knows who you are locally. So I feel like then people sometimes it's like the elephant in the room.
People don't know what to say. Now it's much better now. Back then, people don't know what to say. And we've all been in that position, right? You don't really know what to say. I'm sorry is not enough, but it is. Sometimes all you need to hear is I'm sorry, right? And that's all you need to hear. But there were awkward times, certainly, especially as it relates to expectations from people of moving on. Don't you hate that term, by the way, moving on? We don't move on from grief. We move forward with the person in our heart.
Yes.
We don't move on.
And we keep them present.
They're still
part. Absolutely.
But it might be a little different with the spouse, but it may not. That, have you moved on? You ready to date now? Please don't say that.
Right. And I would think that it's almost that I do think people get themselves nervous, right? Like they don't know what to say and they don't want to not say anything. But then sometimes,
they say the wrong thing.
Yes. And it's wild. Yeah.
Did you experience that as well? I'm curious, Heather. Did people say, stop grieving already? Because people do. We tend to put a timeline on grief.
So we got a lot of so you're going to have another kid. And I was like, we are absolutely not going to have another kid, which we had already decided we were. You know what I mean? Like in my mind, I didn't see that was a natural reaction, but it was a real reaction to a lot of people. So I think probably the parallel to, are you ready to date yet, was, so you're going to have another child. And I was like, no, and then some people had judgment on that too. Like, and I'm sure people had judgment on whether you were dating too soon or not soon enough or whatever. But people were like, but it's not fair to Ethan to not give him a sibling.
Because we have that picture in our mind of what we think is going to make you happy.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. So I'm going to ask you this question too, just because I don't always get the opportunity to talk to people. Right after Jake passed, there was this movement of people who really wanted to medicate me. And I thought it was the weirdest thing because I was really about feeling the feels. That's just who I am, right? Not that I didn't, sometimes want to drink more than probably I should or whatnot. But I certainly was not ready to be knocked out with medication. But there was a real sort of Heather needs to rest, let her rest. Or if I was crying, and I was kind of no. Yeah. Did you have that?
I did. Two things occurred to me when you just said that. My doctor, I only go to a doctor once a month or once a year for physicals. And shortly after Kelly passed, and the following 2 or 3 years, he tried to talk me into taking some sort of relaxing medication. I don't even know what it was called. I always turned it down. In hindsight, maybe I could have used it.
No, now I'm kind of
Because I had a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, sole surviving parent, Crazy.
Crazy.
Crazy town. I don't remember half of it, but I knew that I had to work. And
you had to be present.
I had to be present, and I had the games, and I had to both do the job of dad and the job of my job that I get paid for. So that was a crazy time. But the first time was at Kelly's wake.
Yes, right away.
Yes. Because she fought a very public battle, and perhaps because of the nature of her job being a teacher and being exposed to a lot of people, and my job being exposed to a lot of people, the huge crowd at the wake. In fact, people I didn't even know, which I was moved by, probably, I don't know, 1,500 or so people. Wow. And a woman comes up to me and whispers in my ear, I didn't know her. She said, Mark, I've got something for you. I'm like, okay. She's like, it's in my pocket, grab it.
Stop it.
And I said, I don't really know if that's appropriate. She's like, no, take it. It's Xanax.
Oh my God.
I said, no, thank you. I really appreciate that, but I didn't take it. So that's funny that you should raise that.
It's always been something where I was like, of all the things that I would say to someone, it's never that. But so, okay. Oddly, that makes me feel better because I was like, maybe they just thought I was a mess. But I think it's just a
natural reaction. And it occurred to me too that something you said about in the first episode of your podcast. I listened to it with Brian, and I thought it was terrific because you guys shared all of those stories that you hadn't even spoken about in 10 or 12 years, or I guess how many years? 10 years? 10.
So he's been gone 13 years, but I feel like we haven't had some of those conversations because life just happens, right? Like we try to keep Jake super present, but we don't, over dinner talk about, remember when before he got sick? We just don't. You have moments, right? Like, or a picture will turn up and we'll be like, remember this? But it was the first time in easily 10 plus years that we've talked about some of these things.
Was that hard? Or was it cathartic? Or was it both?
It was cathartic, I would say. I was trying to think of the word, and I would think that is it. He was, I think, a little nervous. I'm always more comfortable being unscripted. Like he likes, if he's an excellent public speaker, but he will work on his speech. He will practice. He goes into the room by himself. He really locks in and he delivers. Like he can knock it out of the park. I don't do that. Like I sort of just sit down, and I think why I'm enjoying this podcast so much is it's just conversations, right? It's just talking about things that are important to me with people that I want to have these conversations with. Like it was kind of a meeting of both of he was very nervous and he was kind of coming out of his comfort zone. But I think once he just stopped, he realized we're just talking, we're just talking about these things. It was cathartic, I think, for both of us. And it's not something that we will probably, bring up these topics again all the time. But it was really nice to talk about them. And it was nice for me to hear his perspective because I can get so wrapped up in my own perspective.
Are you both type A? You're type A, right?
Yeah. We're in different ways, but we're a lot. But he was talking about how it was so hard for him to realize that Jake was never going to play Little League. Yeah. He grew up an athlete and he, was a D1 football college athlete, and Ethan was such an athlete. I never thought about that part of grieving. And one of the things we talk about in A Place of Yes is that, grief isn't just the loss of these significant people in our life, right? Like you grieve the life you thought you were going to have, and you grieve that picture in your mind. And
like you wanted to walk on the beach.
Yes,
100%.
That's
Jake, right?
always what it's this piece that can just bring me to tears still, just because it's obviously never going to happen. And for Brian to hear him talk about the Little League, right? It just made me feel so much closer to him and so much more connected, so I was so happy to have him as a guest. And yeah, it was great.
You made me think of some things that still break my heart to this day when I think about those things that both Kelly is missing out on and my children, Connor and McKenna, are missing out with Kelly. The proms, the weddings, she won't be there. All of those type moments which you described, like Little League and walking on the beach, it still breaks my heart.
It's I don't know that it will ever stop, right? I mean, those are just they're parts of our story, and they were supposed to be different. It's just hard, I think.
It's not the way it was supposed to be.
No, it's not the way it was supposed to be, and I feel like that's so cliche to say, but it wasn't supposed to end that way. Tell me, and if this is too much, certainly say no.
Not at all.
McKenna was 1 when Kelly got diagnosed. Yeah. That's got to be hard. And how old was Connor?
Connor was 3.
Okay. And so she fought for...
She did. Actually, so she's diagnosed at 32. No history of cancer in the family
None.
at all.
Okay.
Came out of nowhere. I remember we went to the doctor's appointments. I was at work. I got called by the doctor. The surgeon had told me, this isn't cancer. Don't worry about it. No problem.
Oh, really?
And then I get a call at work from the surgeon saying, are you sitting down? he called me first. He wanted to talk to me first. And he said, it's cancer. And he said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I would have never thought it's cancer, but it's cancer. So we have to remove it. So she removed it. We got it removed. And then we went through the radiation and chemo. She had an awful time with chemo.
How long was the chemo period?
Seems like forever, but it was about a year.
Okay.
And then she was in remission, so we thought we'd beaten it.
Okay.
We thought we were all set. And then she had some pain in her sternum about a year and a half later, and it turns out it had come back and it had metastasized to her bones. But still, it was always when she gets better, much like Jake, not if she gets better. So we're picturing the life that's going to happen when she gets better, much as you were picturing the life as when Jake gets better. It wasn't that way, obviously. It wasn't meant to be. So we'd run out of options here in the United States, and we were fortunate enough to have friends have a fundraiser so we could go to Mexico for some alternative treatment. It was against my better judgment, and we had some fights about it.
So she wanted to go.
She wanted to go.
Because she wanted to just know she had tried everything.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. So our doctor, our local oncologist, Dr. Rufus Kalia, who was at NYOH, New York Oncology Hematology, sat me down and said, go. He said, I don't know that they can do anything, but why not offer her some hope? So it was a hospital in Mexico called Oasis of Hope. In hindsight, it was terrible.
Okay.
They didn't really know what they were doing, but we had to go. So we went. She was supposed to be there for 8 weeks, as I recall. Might be more or less than that. I brought her there, stayed with her there for a week. The children were back here.
I was going to say,
my in-laws were watching the kids. So I got her settled, came back.
And what was that like? That must have been horrible.
That was difficult, leaving her in Mexico.
Yes.
Yeah. So she was doing okay at that point, but she was filled with cancer. So I left her there, and then came back because we had young kids at home. And then one of her best friends went down, and one of the best friends calls me one night after, I guess she'd been there 3 or 4 weeks, and said, she's not doing well at all. So I said, well, can you put her on the phone? Again, she's calling from Mexico. And I said, honey, do you want to come home? And she said, she was having trouble breathing. She said, yes, I do. So this is the middle of the night. I scrambled to Albany Airport, get on a flight, try to get arrangements to get her home, and she needed oxygen.
Oh, God.
And the hospital in Mexico didn't have enough oxygen to get us to the airport, which was terrible.
Mark.
Terrible experience. So I'm on the phone with the airline because the airlines have oxygen for people. So we managed to get on the plane in San Diego because we'd crossed over the border. And they provided some oxygen for us. So we got on the plane early, like an hour and a half before everyone else boarded, so she could breathe. So we touched down in Albany. We go to Albany Med, and I said, we're going right to the hospital once we get off the plane, and we did. We went to the ER. She was having trouble breathing, and they did some scans, and they called me out and said her lungs are now completely filled with cancer, and she's not going to live. So that was the first time we'd had that discussion. So I have to go into the emergency room now, into her room in ICU at this point, and tell her what the doctors had said. Because we were still expecting when she gets better that this was just a setback. I told her that. We cried. We spent the night in the ICU together. I spent the night with her, and she made it through the night. And I said, honey, do you want to go home? Like, want to go home?
Yep.
And she said, yes, I do. She wanted to go home. And I moved mountains and heaven and earth to get her home, because when someone is critically ill, they don't want to transport. They don't want to transport, right? Because there's some liability and all those things. So I moved heaven and earth, got the okay for her to go home. It's about 2:00 in the afternoon now. I race up the Northway so I can get Connor and McKenna off the school bus, because they
talk about like balancing all these.
Oh yeah, so I'm racing. I race up the Northway, and I get them off the bus, and they're excited to see me because they knew that Daddy. They didn't know what was going on, but they knew that Daddy was going to pick up Mommy. So I said, well, Mommy's home. She's at the hospital now. She's coming home. They're happy about that. And I said, well, remember how we've always talked about when Mommy's going to get better? They said yes. And I said, well, she's not going to get better. She's going to go to heaven. And they both started crying. I started crying. And as kids will do, they get up and hug me. In unison, they say, can we have our snack now? Because that's what kids.
Because they don't even know what to think about.
That's what kids do.
Oh,
but I'm forever thankful, as they are, that we got 3 or 4 days where she was at home. She was completely with it. She just wasn't well. She had full amount of oxygen we could give her, and the kids got to read to her in bed, and we got to feed her strawberries, and she's, again, completely with it. And we had, it sounds funny to say, but we had a beautiful experience over those 3 or 4 days.
No, it's not funny to say. I think that is an absolute gift I am sure that that is what's so important to your kids too, right? Like a little bit different because Jake passed unexpectedly, but he was at the funeral home that is across the street virtually from our house. And one of the things that the funeral director did for us was once he was there and he was in the coffin and stuff, he left the back door open. And same, not the same, but he was like, I'm just going to let you guys know that it's open. You can come in at any time. And at first I was like, it's ridiculous. Like I was kind of
so sweet, isn't it?
It was the nicest, most amazing thing ever. And when I tell you that the three of us, it was like 2 a.m. one time, I was like, I got to go see Jake, right? And I just went across with like my blanket. And then once we woke up Ethan, and like we just had these moments.
Beautiful.
Jealous is a weird word to use in this, but like the fact that you guys had that, those days.
I'll always be grateful for it.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the Mexico? Because I agree, that's 100% what you had to give that to her. You had to let her see that through.
It was
but
a bone
do you
of
struggle
contention.
with that?
No,
Okay.
because we were able to resolve it.
Okay.
But we went back and forth on it.
I'm sure.
And she was the woman I loved. She was the woman of my dreams. I married her. It wasn't supposed to be this way. It was only because I wanted what was best for her.
Yes.
We didn't know. It was a great unknown in Mexico. And I think she came around to that. But it was that conversation with her oncologist when he said, I don't have anything for her. Why not? Why not give her some hope?
It's not going to, give her, and if it means something to her.
But I did struggle with it at the time, as she did. And I know she journaled about it.
Okay.
So
do you ever read her journals?
I don't.
You don't?
I don't. And in fact, after she passed away, I didn't open them.
Okay.
Because I know some of them were where she was angry about me, and that was personal, very intimate. If she wanted to tell me those things, she would tell me.
Yep.
But if there was something that she wanted to journal, I never wanted to read them.
That is excellent restraint. I'm not sure that I would always have had that. But I admire that, and I think that's great. I mean but that's a testament to your story, to your love story.
It was hard.
That is respect, and that's wonderful. Well, Mark, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm sorry too. But we've both turned grief into good, which I'm proud of, and I'm sure you're proud.
I am really proud of it. I am, in those early days, right? Like when your whole world has blown up. I remember thinking so vividly, and you've kind of referenced it too. It's like you don't know that you remember things exactly right? You remember.
No, because it's chaotic. It's a blur.
Chaotic. It's all of it is chaotic. And I don't know, some things are so, like I feel like it happened in the days after, but it really wasn't. I have no idea. When I was going through my grief and I was such a, so heartbroken, like it's almost like I had to be two people. Like I had to grieve very privately, but I had to be a mom. And you've kind of referenced it too. So you had to have your moments when you had to let it all out, but then you had to be dad, and you had to kind of be mom, and you had to be strong, right? So
absolutely. I would cry at night because I felt, and I don't know if it was the right thing to do. There's no playbook for this sort of thing.
No one tells you what to do.
But you put on the strong face for your children.
Yeah.
Because that's what you have to do. Two things occur to me. One, shortly after Kelly passed away, she passed away in October, just 5 or 6 days after her birthday, I went to a grief support group, which was for someone who'd suffered a loss of spouse. And I was the youngest there by probably 25, 30 years. And there were one after another, people would stand up. And again, they're grieving. So this is not a judgment, but they're standing up saying, the topic was dealing with loss at the holidays, because it was Christmas time. Well, what I remember when I lost my spouse, we didn't even put up a tree. I didn't want to put up a tree. And I'm sitting there thinking, I got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Santa's going to come.
You think I'm not going to put up a tree? So that was we were in a different place. And the other was when someone said to me, when do you grieve? And I started crying then. I would grieve at night. Yeah. After I got the kids, finally, I could breathe. I could take a breath. I had the lunches made and those sorts of things. I could go into my room and cry myself.
But it's like you had to have almost, like I always felt like I had like two personalities.
Yes, because you wanted to do what was right for Ethan.
Yes, 100%. You had to do right by them, but then you also was like a whirlwind of chaos.
Yeah. Sadly.
No, there's such overlap, yeah.
Yeah, that is a bond that we all have. We've all experienced loss.
Yeah.
You and I, it's a little fresher, maybe a little more forward public facing, but there are so many things that we all have in common. I think that's why we're both doing a podcast.
So you talked about that like support group you went to.
Yeah.
So we went to one similar, and we brought Ethan because it was, for families, like it was, lost a...
Yes.
I don't even remember. I think it was for like they've lost a sibling, but also was for if you lost a child.
They had wave riders.
That's what it was. It was wave riders. That's 100% what it was. Yeah. I want to preface this. It was not judgmental at all, But it was so many people in such different places, you know, and it goes to show that people grieve differently and they handle things differently, and it's just there's no end of emotions around it. But I remember sitting there, you know, I think it was because of Ethan kind of, but you know, people sort of the same thing, you know, oh, we don't do this on the holidays, and I don't get out of bed on the birthday, and I remember kind of using that as this for me. This is not how I want to be. And this is not how Jake would want his mom to be. And this is certainly is not what Ethan's mom could do. You know, I mean, I almost felt like I was like these different personalities, right? Like I had to like keep them all sort of together. But I just remember being like, I can be perpetually sad for the rest of my life, which there's a piece of me that is just constantly heartbroken. But I can also take this and I can figure out how to put one foot in front of the other and move forward.
Yeah, I think that's what we all have to do. In fact, as far as our podcast is concerned, that's what I often ask. And I want to ask you that. What's your message? For those who might be new to grief, or grief might be new to them, how did you put one foot in front of the other, and what do you recommend that they do?
I don't know that everyone believes in the same way, right? But I always have to think of like, I was Jake's mom, you know, and I was the person that when he was young, I was like his everything, right? Because it's like you're the mom, and then I had to advocate for him, and I had to provide for him, and you don't stop being that person, and I don't think he stops needing that person. This, you know, not everyone believes in these same sort of things, but I do believe he's still aware and a presence, and part of it, I think you just have to find whatever grain of good there is.
Yeah,
I do. I think that, you know, and even in these horrible moments, whether it's like living in the memory for a little bit or whatever it is, I just know that I feel like I would be letting Jake down if I allowed my grief and sorrow to turn me into someone that was not who he knew as his mom, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like it's a disservice to him. And then I also feel like, and I'm wondering if you ever feel this way with Kelly, if there is this spiritual afterworld, if there's any of those things, I don't want him to feel bad. Like, I don't want him to look down on me and think I'm a mess and it's his fault. Yeah. You know? Do you ever?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think that's a great point. And I don't think people often think of that. We want to believe that there is a place where they've ended up, which is whether you call it heaven or whether you call it an afterlife, you want to make them proud.
There's a part of me, though, that's even sitting up there like Kelly's probably hanging out with Jake, and they're like, "Oh, look at him!"
Isn't
like,
I
mean,
cool?
I do. I think that's kind of cool, right?
She was the teacher. And,
like I always think of that, and I don't know. And sometimes I'm like, you know, when we talk about what things people say, like sometimes I'm like, oh, do I say the most like wacky things now to people? Because like I'll be like, oh, you know, they're with Jake. Brian sometimes like, I don't know that they want to hear that, you know.
You never know.
You never know. I was like, well.
And isn't Jake's help from heaven a gift in that regard? And Kelly's Angels is a gift in that regard. Yeah. So we're honoring them while doing good.
100%. Yeah. What do you think Kelly's thinking of all this? Of what do you think she thinks of Kelly's Angels? What do you think she thinks of?
I like to think that she is smiling on it. She had a beautiful smile. So I like to think that she's smiling down upon it. She was a little, even though she was a teacher, she was a little bit more reserved. In front of her students, not so much. I know she used to get deathly afraid of parent-teacher nights.
Oh, really?
They're totally different. She could teach in front of 25 third graders all day, every day.
But yet the parents,
she was scared to death. In fact, we used to create videos so she could play the video, and that would be most of her presentation.
That's awesome.
So, but I think she would be smiling down. She'd be a little sheepish that her name is used so often. I think she would love it. And I think that she would love the fact that it helps her children connect with her. And in fact, when we started the organization, when we started Kelly's Angels, that was the selfish goal for me, because people were so kind and helpful and friendly to us, even strangers. I wanted to show my children that we could pay it forward.
So it's funny that you use the word selfish, because I use that a lot also, because people are like, oh, you do such good work at Jake's Help from Heaven. And sometimes they're like, it's so selfless. And I'm like, oh, no, it's not selfless. It's very selfish. Like it allows me to be so connected, to a population that I know and love and feel like I can offer something to. Yeah. And it allows me to talk about my boy all the time. Like, you know, it's great work and I know it benefits people, but it's selfish, right? Like it gives us this chance.
Yes, it can
like
be
not
both.
In a bad way, like not bad selfish, but
it can be both selfless and selfish, right?
All at the same time.
Yeah, I love that too.
So in those last days, right, like when she comes home and you're all together, like, did the kids go to school? Like, or did you all, like, what was that like? And I say that honestly, and this is weird, but a little jealous, because I think that's such a beautiful time that you were able to have together. As tragic and sad as the ending, it's Beautiful.
It is a beautiful time, and I'll always be grateful for it. But the kids did go to school. In fact, I remember the email. Email was fairly new, I guess, 15 years ago. I remember writing the email to both of the kids' teachers saying we're trying to keep things as normal as possible. I said, Kelly is home now, and her time with us is ending. I just want to let you know we're sending the kids, but I may be pulling them out at a moment's notice. Yeah. And I heard from both teachers first. The one teacher, McKenna, was in kindergarten. Her teacher emailed me back saying, now that I've gathered myself, now that I've stopped crying and had to excuse myself from the classroom, I will honor your wishes and do whatever you want. So just call me and you can pick up McKenna immediately. But they did. That was the goal, to have them have things as normal as possible. Now, actually, I don't think I've shared this story, but when Kelly passed away, she was dying and we knew the end was near. Both Connor and McKenna went to a friend's in our neighborhood. Okay. Because we knew the time was near. I called them and had them come back and say goodbye to Mommy. That was not easy.
No.
So they got on the bed and they said goodbye to her.
Do you think they understood?
I do. Okay. I do. At least they knew that she was going to heaven. Yeah. Because they both did it. In fact, my son wrote his college essay about that particular experience. Okay. And he talked about how the clock was his enemy. And he talked about tick-tock, tick-tock. And he knew that with each passing second or minute that it was going to be.
That it was going to,
So they came back from a friend's house. And then immediately after she passed away, friends in our neighborhood decided to put luminaria throughout our entire neighborhood. There were thousands of them, which was absolutely beautiful. And the kids, my children, I'll always be grateful for this as well. They were able to help place the luminaria throughout the neighborhood. So it was
like, what a way to take that moment though and create something.
Yeah. That was
larger almost.
And and I don't know how much McKenna remembers because she was 5, but we have some video and some photos of those too that I love.
It's interesting. You made me think of something. So, the day after Jake passed, we sent Ethan to school. And I wish I could say that it was like this well thought out thing that we were trying to keep life normal, but we didn't,
you don't know what to do.
We didn't know what to do. So we sent him to school and we had, we kind of let his teacher know. He was in kindergarten also. His kindergarten teacher, and it sounds like the same for McKenna, will always have such a special place in my heart. Like I told the story, I think before, of that I ran into her on like Spring Run Trail and I basically assaulted her. Like I was like hugged her. I was like, Mrs. Samoa's, I love you so much. Sure. We just have this connection because you need other people to help you in that dark time. And the people that show up will always have that special place, right? Like I'm sure your neighbors, like just there's certain people that it's almost like they have a free pass for everything.
Absolutely.
Right? Like
I'm thinking of someone right now. Yeah. The day Kelly passed away, before I had Connor and McKenna say goodbye to her and before I said goodbye to her, one of her favorite students, teachers have favorite students. They'll tell you they're not supposed to, but they do. One of her favorite students was a boy named Connor LaFrance. Okay. I don't know if you know
I do.
So Connor, we were in Mexico, Connor was killed in a motocross accident. He was a world-class motocrosser. Yeah. And he was killed, and Kelly felt so badly about it. She's at this hospital in Mexico. I was with her at the time, and word got to us. She was shattered by it. She had a special connection with Connor. Connor was that kid who she connected with, and he connected with her. So when we got home and she was dying, because she felt horrible that she couldn't get to the funeral or the wake or anything. We're in Mexico. I invited Dave and Andrea, Connor's parents, to the house. They came to the house. And it was almost like she'd had unfinished business because they sat with her for a few minutes and she told them how fond she was of Connor and how much she liked their involvement in the class. And they prayed with her and cried with her, and they left. She died a half hour after they left.
Wow. The other interesting connection, I think so Connor wrote his essay about that. Yeah. Ethan wrote his college essay about having to call 911. When
on the night Jakey was.
Yeah, because when it became really clear to me that something was happening, I screamed at Ethan to call 911. A 5-year-old,
only 5, yeah.
And we didn't talk about it a lot until really his senior year. And he wrote this really poignant, beautiful essay. And it's funny you say you don't know what McKenna remembers at 5. They remember a lot, I think.
Yeah.
I was surprised by his essay. I was very touched by it. It was very beautiful. Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave us a thumbs up or leave us a comment. We would appreciate all that you can do. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend or two. For more information and to leave us any feedback, please reach out to us at jakeshelpfromheaven.org.